earlier today, you had made a very interesting remark about the nature of sources available in Western India, being more predominantly literary, and
And they are Jain mostly.
as compared to Southern India that has a greater amount of inscriptional sources. Takes me to um, the judicious use of inscriptions that you make vis-a-vis architectural form in your monograph on the temple forms in the inscriptions of the Karnat region. Uh, where you identify in the inscriptions themselves the typology of the temple forms.
See, in inscriptions, you sometimes get terms which would relate to the beauty, elegance, size, and through metaphors and similes, as in Vastu text, what should be done by the architect or sculptor. And these are terms which are parallel to those which are used in inscriptions. But they talk about the quality. Quality by its own nature, according to the medium, is either visual or sonatory. If it's music, if it's literature, then it is both reading and listening to the dhvani of it. See how it works. And you say, oh, wonderful. But it's the qualitative aspect. See? And the quality by itself is conditioned by the time in a particular area when it reaches the great heights, either in terms of size, bulk, quantity, or in terms of quality. Now, there were certain generalities. For instance, for northern India, 10th century in temples is a great period, era, when quality manifests everywhere. There are phases which when before you attain this climax, and it remains for a moment at that culmination point and then begins to go down and it goes for quantity, size. Look at the phenomenon and history in Kalinga or even outside Cambodia, the 10th century Bentaiswari, 10th century Mukteshwar in Bhubaneswar, 10th century temples in Gujarat and Rajasthan. That quality level is high. But in the next centuries, it's a great size. See, Angkor Wat, and it's highly monumental, but qualitatively, it is the Bentaisari which you prefer. I mean, as aesthetician, we, today's people, those who look at it all philosophically, for them it's all one, there is no difference. Or if you look at it purely from socio-anthropological point of view, it's the great wealth of the society, or certain depictions, degeneration in society. One engineer in the guest house at Udaipur told me Khajuraho is a highly debased period. Look at the erotic sculptures, how people were debased. See, that is his reading from socio-anthropological point of view. the reality of life. They begin to read. We see today as pieces of particular corner of art. Okay. It's not the main thing. It is in the side corner. But it's not without its own charm and significance.
So to take you back to your monograph on the temple forms in Karnataka inscriptions once again, since that is a specific monograph where you take information from the inscriptions and relate it to actual architectural forms in the region.
As well as the Vastu Shastra.
Yes, and your larger work with the Vastu Shastras is extremely well known and should be a topic for a larger discussion to follow soon. But how do you distinguish the kind of information that you get vis-a-vis architectural form from the inscriptions and the kind of information that you get from the texts?
Inscriptions give you the nomenclature of the type. Mm-hmm. It doesn't provide the visual aspects of it. It doesn't mention because it is not its field. Mm-hmm. Now there we approach to the Vastu text. Okay, Bhumija is mentioned here. Then Bhumija is defined and its elevation is also step by step raised before your eyes. See? And then what you need is a visual aid from the field. In actual examples, correlate them, text. Name you got, identification and other details from the text, and confirmation from the field studies.
The actual temples.
Actual visual images are there, how they looked, and then after comes history of art or architecture. It tells you a lot more other things. It relates itself to history and ethnic types. See, here comes anthropology. Khajuraho ethnic type is different from the contemporary Gujarat and Rajasthan ethnic type. Generalities are the same. Ideas, conceptually, they are very close, and also take them to Kalinga. See, ethnically they are different, though the cultural phenomena is the same. See? So there you get the help of ethnology, a branch of anthropology, which I use. I do not deny.
Now, sir, a very, very major, chunk of your life's pursuit has been, the study of the Vastu Shastras, and of course its relationship to actual monuments. Sort of working out the terminological basis of the Indian temples. When and where exactly did you begin this work? And which were the first Vastu Shastras that you looked at, and then how did it develop from there?
When I was working in the Junagadh Museum, say from 55 to 59, 3 years and a half to be precise. Now, there I read Aparajita Prucha and the Samarangana Sutradhar for the first time.
I remember that wonderful paper of yours at this juncture, the influence of the Samarangana Sutradhar on the Aparajita Prucha. Does this belong to that time when you first looked at it?
It belongs to the literary discipline, where they decide dates, relative dates of the text. But Here, you need the knowledge of architecture to decide. That is additional, they cannot do it.
Yeah.
That is the point. I mean, methodology is the same, but the tools here somewhat differ. Am I clear?
Yes, yes. But tell us about the process of how your interest and your pursuit of the Vastu Shastras.
Yeah. See,
carried
to
forward.
understand the content of it, you have to understand how they looked at it, how they organized in ancient times, and what is the meaning of the terms they use. How the terms differ from the normal words, vocables. They are vocables but special. See, now these words are invested with a special meaning. Sometimes the same word which in normal parlance we use it in certain sense, here they have a specific and different meaning. It is possible, upsarga, for instance, a word in grammar, see, it prefix and suffix in their context is used. But in Jain terminology, upsarga means a visiting suffering. Mahavir had the upsarga, tilak upsarga. He was standing in meditation and the shepherd came and said, oh Babaji, look after my bullocks. He was in meditation, lost in standing there. And when he came back, his bulls went away, and he was very annoyed. He said, are you deaf? Then he put two twigs, no, I would say branches, pieces of the tree, in their ears. So it's highly painful. This is upsarga, visiting suffering. Now this is not the normal meaning, it's very specific meaning. So same thing in Vastu Shastras, there are many terms which differ in meaning from the normal.
So the exact
So you have to
connotation-
distinguish them,
Yeah.
understand them that these are terms, not words.
Right. So this is a very important distinction. The term and the loaded connotations that inhere within the term, and which essentially what you just conveyed through that example of upsarga is that it cannot be substituted effectively by another, say, equivalent term. Not always possible to substitute that term.
Difficulty starts
Yeah.
when you try to translate this into
Another
totally different language.
Right.
And then they hate the terms. I mean, those who study, they say, we want our equivalent. See, one of my friends, he called Shikhara as tower. See? Tower. Now, I look at the tower in European architecture. Tower can be either isolated or at the front end, a pair, or a single one, or at the back side itself, but never on the top of the sanctuary. See? Now, Shikhara is Shikhara. It has its own formal and cultural context and religious context, everything.
And also, like, for example, to push your upsarga analogy further, the upsarga applies equally beautifully to the Parshvanatha, Kamatha,
Yes.
Megamali,
Right.
Dharanendra.
There it works.
There it works. So that term is applicable in similar situations.
See, look,
Yeah.
if you have studied darshanas, that is, different philosophical systems. We had in India the Nastic Darshan, atheist. Now, one author, Jayarashi, in the 8th century, in his book Tattva Pallava Simha, says categorically that words have no meaning inherent in them. All meanings are attributed in the words. See? And he is very accurate when he says that Samaj in Ashokan inscription means very different from what we say today. Samaj means society today. 300 years ago, or 400 or 500 years ago, it meant community gathering, society gathering.
And in Ashokan inscriptions,
in Ashokan it is fair. Don't go to the Samaj because there are people who play dances and what is called Yugutu, that is truth. See? And they drink there, which is done in Mela. Today's Mela is ancient Samaj, whereas today's ancient Samaj is today's society.
So the shifting meanings of the term in different periods of time.
See, Jayarasi said that if the meaning is inherent in the words, its exposition should be instantaneous to us. It may be any language. It may be Yavana, he says, or Parsika, Persian or Greek. But we should be able to understand because the meaning is inherent, you say.
So now if we take this to the architectural terms, take this back to the architectural terms, and as you were studying the Vastu Shastras and as you were looking at contemporary temples or temples a little before and after the date of that Vastu Shastra, and you kind of resurrected a terminology for temple architecture from a wide cross-section of published, unpublished manuscripts, some with sculptors, some in libraries, and you sort of built a basis, a terminological basis for temple architecture which was rooted as much in the textual as in the monumental, you know. How many decades did that spread to, and how many regions, you know, and how many unpublished manuscripts were transcribed? I know that there are handwritten manuscripts in the American Institute Library. Some, Geeta Ben told me, were transcribed by her.
I remember one movie, a novel converted into movie, Anna and the King of Siam. And then Anna came from England to teach to the children of the king of Thailand. Now, the king asks the lady, "Madam, what's your age? She said, 150 years, Your Majesty." So I would say 150 years for this manuscript.
It comes across as more than 150 years. The kind of is more than a lifetime, but it must have. This in itself is sort of. There is resistance now to using these terms, and there is a constant, what shall I say, sometimes silent, sometimes loud protest to an over Sanskritized way of writing. What is your reaction to that?
Look, when we write in English, but for keeping Indian audience in mind, the terms we use are valid because they are in Sanskrit,
Yeah.
and Sanskrit is the basis of most languages. Southern languages, though they have different origins, they still have in their vocabulary, and their shastras were written in Sanskrit, Vastu shastras. So there is no disparity or disharmony anywhere in India. The difficulty comes when the scene is transferred to the West, Europe and America. It is they who want to use the vocables which are current there, or the terms which were innate to their own past cultures and past architecture. And they resist. That is one thing. They think that we Indians have no right. See, the temples sometimes begin to belong to them. In one seminar, two American scholars working in the same area, Chalukyan, Karnataka, they began to argue and fight among themselves as if we have nothing to do with it. The area belongs to them. When I worked in southern India, Tamil Nadu in particular, a particular institute's particular officer was very annoyed. See, said, it is we who are working here. So the whole area they possess is theirs. Now, and they want to do it in their own way. Now, he has edited and he has done wonderful job of Sanskrit text, but never applies that terminology when he writes in his own native tongue or in English. Now, what explanation do you offer? Why? It's psychological feeling of superiority or a wrong notion that foreign terms cannot be used in their language. But English language itself has grown by loan words. I read one of the authors in the Encyclopedia Britannica, or the editors, chief editor of the Oxford University of English, that 3/4 of English language uses borrowed words. Their origin is in other languages. So why oppose to this?
So by that logic, I mean essentially what you're trying to say through this is that rather than substitute English non-equivalents that don't fit into the specificities of Indian architecture, it makes more sense, as per what you just said, to use the architectural terms which best fit that region's architecture, and that becomes a borrowed term in English at some point.
Look, for Chinese art, if you have read those articles in Artificial and other places, in other Western journals, they not only put the Chinese word, but the entire script verse is Chinese. See, when we take about Chang Chao, that thing comes in between. Now, why do they not object or resist to that? Why Indian Sanskrit terms? See, when you say tower, it creates a different image. Tower is tower. It is a fixed notion as well as a material visuality. Why to confuse it? Sometimes if there is some functional analogy, or at least a very distant analogy, but it is no substitute for Shikara, no.
But there is one problem that is arising more and more with the passage of time is the distancing of even the Indian student from Sanskrit terms. And therefore when they read a text that is heavily laden with Sanskrit terms, the level of understanding is extremely poor. And there's constantly this preference for English equivalents. What is the way out? What is the way out?
Look here, in 1939, when I was admitted to high school, I preferred French as a second language, and how it was taught by direct method. No English equivalent was allowed. See?
Yeah, they follow pretty much the same
So
method
directly, so by using Sanskrit terms and leading you to the form, guiding you, you begin to relate the two. Now that was the aim. Secondly, it is faithful to the tradition. Tradition didn't use Western equivalents, see, or the text didn't use. If you write in your own native tongue, will you say tower, see, and platform and all these things? If you are used to this Western terminology, what would you do when you write in your native tongues in India? And we have 14 regional languages.
Talking of regional specificities, one final question on the terminology. Is the terminology specific to the Kalinga region, which you have not used, you have not used, and what is your rationale for that?
Problem is, Kalinga region has largely lost its ancient text. Some passages, some lines survive. Also one text, Lakshana Samuchaya, which is on the borderline of Madhya Pradesh, Kalinga and Bengal. And there that use the Kalinga terminology in Sanskrit. Triratha, Pancharatha, Saptaratha, Navaratha.
So, which text? I'm sorry.
Lakshana Samuchaya of Vairocchani, which may be either 11th century or 13th century. It's very difficult to decide because the architecture in certain planning, it is more evolved. In elevation, it can be applied 11th to the 11th century and like that. Now, because they are using Uriya terms today, N.K. Bose and Professor S.K. Saraswati, when we initiated this project, they insisted that we should use a common, uniform corpus of terms used in Orissa for the whole of northern India. I said, what about South India? N.K. Bose said, well, they have their own separate thing. So they have their Tamil terms. We in Gujarat have, Saratas have their own terms. Jadambo, Jaddikumba becomes Jadambo, Kapotali, Keval.
Where do you get these local terms?
Local terms are spoken by Salatas.
And the terminology that is used, say for example, in Donaldson's volumes on the temples of Orissa, that has been reconstructed on the basis of the usage by the Sthapati Shilpis,
yes.
or on the basis of a
Sthapatis.
text?
Text was very late text they got from Sthapatis. Bhuvan Pradeep,
Which century?
This canons of Orison architecture both uses Bhuvan Pradip. And there, in between, there are Sanskrit pages here or there. It means that they had lost the original Bhuvan Pradip, but its bhasha has remained. Bhasha means translation or bhashya, see, has remained.
And the Bhashya,
Bhashya is in Uriya.
Bhashya uses Orison terms.
It uses Uriya terms, Uriya rendering of Sanskrit terms.
Oh, okay.
So I say that we adopt a uniform principle that Sanskrit should be the language of the corpus. Terms may differ. For the same thing, terms may differ. Connotations may sometimes differ. For instance, Shikhara in northern India is a whole thing. In southern India it is only the cupola. So we have to follow faithfully that notion of the term there, as it is prevalent there. Term is Sanskrit, but the notion differs. Notion in the sense, the visual. And see, they don't have the concept of Shikhara as an undifferentiated whole. There are flaws, steps. They don't call the whole thing as superstructure as Shikhara. No, it is superstructure. They don't have a single term for that. And what comes about the wall are other flaws, symbolic. Yes, half the size. See, they are talas. But the whole thing, no concept.
So
And same thing is in Southeast Asia, in Java.
So your preference for using Sanskrit terminology throughout was one, uniformity, and two, that the probably not.
Look,
the texts were not.
Central India has completely lost their text. So what do we do? Khajuraho. Samarang Sutra is for Malwa. And that Bhumija chapters are there, but it gives other chapters, Miman Nagar and others. And one of them applies to Khajuraho. See, that Dravidian applies to the early Chalukyan, but Adam says no, it applies to Tamil Nadu. But I find differences, but which he and his students they just differ from me and contradict me in their writings. I don't lift my pen to show. Let them do it, is their term.
No, but what is your rationale should be also.
Look here, now
articulated.
my time is over. I don't write. Let future people decide. Those who work on the text, who are they, how many are there? He's trying his best to understand the text. Let him do. He translates them and has a Pandit to help. Now there is a term Giri Patrika in Dravidian architecture. What does it mean? It is never found in Dravidian text. What does it mean there in that
Giri Patrika in the Dravidian architecture section of Samarangana Sutra.
Yes.
But it is not found in the Dravidian texts.
No. And there are others also. See, I said, yes, it may have been there. But where are the texts of Karnataka architecture? You show me. Then
In
earlier, see,
Karnataka-
Bose's time is almost 20 to 55.
1035 to 55 as per
That
your,
is the text.
yeah.
I put Samarang Sutra because of certain advances. And the Chalukyan temples which were built before 1055 and the text which is related to that, the author of Samarang Sutra may have before it that one. In South, Maya Matra is around 1050, 55. That was the earliest text available. Was it available to the writer of Samarang Sutradhar? From where certain terms here, which figure here come, not from that source.
Now in Karnataka, the absence of texts in this period relating to architectural terminology, how far is it sort of, since in Karnataka you have many inscriptions that also mention temple forms. So do we get forms but not the details of the forms?
And not the elevational.
Sub-elements are
No,
not formed.
sub-elements, moldings, etc.
Then there are no
No.
names.
They carve inscriptions sometimes on moldings, but they don't refer to that particular.